The Forgotten Guest. The holiday season was a lonely time for Mark. His friends were away and his family estranged. Determined to avoid spending Christmas alone in his tiny apartment, he rented a large, old-fashioned house in a small, snow-covered town. The house was a sprawling Victorian. Its ornate details faded with time, and its looming figure cast shadows that stretched across the icy driveway. Mark arrived late on Christmas Eve, his car tires crunching on the snow. The house stood dark and foreboding, its windows black and hollow. The rental agency had described it as charming and perfect for a quiet holiday retreat. The price was suspiciously low, but Mark didn't question it. Solitude was what he wanted. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with a faint metallic scent, as if the house itself exhaled its history into every corner. Furniture covered in white sheets lined the rooms, and the floors creaked under his steps. The centerpiece of the living room was a grand Christmas tree, decorated with vintage ornaments that glittered faintly in the dim light. The tree seemed to be the only thing in the house with life. Mark spent the first few hours unpacking and settling in. The house was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural. He poured himself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace, staring at the tree. Its ornaments reflected the flames, shimmering in a way that seemed almost too vibrant, too alive. But as the night deepened, the unease set in. The wind outside howled, and Mark thought he heard faint noises, creaks, faint thumps, and what sounded like footsteps overhead. He dismissed it as the house settling. After all, it was over a century old. He turned on some music and tried to relax. Then came the tapping. It started faintly, like the sound of a nail lightly striking wood. The rhythm was deliberate, almost purposeful. Mark froze, listening. The sound seemed to come from the far end of the hallway. He grabbed his phone and flashlight and walked toward the noise, his heart thudding in his chest. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered, its wallpaper faded and peeling. The tapping stopped as he reached the end. Mark shined the flashlight around, but there was nothing. Just furniture shrouded in sheets and the faint hum of the old radiator. He let out a nervous laugh and returned to the living room. But the tapping resumed, louder this time, and it was followed by something new, a soft, barely perceptible whisper. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was coming from the fireplace. Mark turned toward the hearth. The fire had dimmed to embers and the room felt unnaturally cold. As he leaned closer, the whispers grew louder. They weren't words he could understand. Low, guttural murmurs, overlapping voices that seemed to vibrate in his skull. He stumbled back, grabbing his phone, but the screen flickered and went black. The lights in the house dimmed, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then a loud thud echoed from upstairs. Mark froze, his breath visible in the chilled air. The noise came again, heavier this time, like something being dragged across the floor. He debated leaving, but the storm outside was fierce, and his car was buried under snow. Gathering his courage, he climbed the staircase, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The second floor was darker and colder. The hallway stretched endlessly, the air thick with an unplaceable smell, something metallic and decayed. The thudding continued, louder and closer, leading him to a door at the far end. Mark hesitated. His hand trembled as he gripped the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with dust and shadows. A full-length mirror stood in the corner, its surface cloudy and cracked. As Mark stepped closer, the flashlight flickered. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement within the reflection, but when he looked directly, the glass was still. Then the door slammed shut behind him. Mark spun around, fumbling with the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, louder now, and they were coming from the mirror. He turned to face it. The surface was no longer cloudy. It was clear, and in it, he saw himself. But his reflection wasn't right. It grinned back at him, its face pale and stretched, its eyes black voids. The reflection stepped forward. Mark stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of a rug. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers turned to laughter, low, mocking, inhuman. The door flew open, and Mark bolted down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Back in the living room, he found the fire roaring again, though he hadn't touched it. The tree lights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Then he saw it, a single wrapped gift beneath the tree. It hadn't been there before. Mark hesitated, every instinct telling him to leave. But something compelled him forward. He knelt by the tree and unwrapped the box. Inside was an old photograph, its edges worn and yellowed. It showed the living room exactly as it was now, but in the center of the room stood Mark, surrounded by shadowy figures. On the back of the photo, written in spidery handwriting, were the words, "You are always part of the family." Mark dropped the photo and ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him. The lights on the tree exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. The last thing Mark saw was the shadows, dozens of them, stepping out from the walls, their hollow eyes fixed on him. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Beats Shadows and hit the bell icon for more spine-chilling stories. Stay tuned for tales that will keep you up long after the video ends.